Consider all bonuses frozen, Denise chirped, grinning like she'd just handed out gold medals instead of gut punches. We were in the Q3 wrap meeting, third floor conference room, the one with the flickering LED panel and that faint smell of microwave salmon someone reheated in July and cursed the room with for eternity. The walls were corporate beige, but that morning they might as well have been painted in blood. She stood there, high on her own perfume and proximity to power, flanked by her fresh shellac manicure and a knockoff Birkin that screamed, "I watched a YouTube tutorial on executive presence." Her job title still had wet ink on it, head of strategy, a promotion she earned by horizontal networking with our CEO, Craig. I blinked once, slowly. My jaw didn't twitch, but my molars were filing a grievance. The room was full. HR, sales, ops. Even the overworked IT guy who only emerged from his server cave when promised donuts was there. Denise had made sure to gather an audience. She flipped to the next slide on the screen, a bright bar graph labeled Q3 efficiency projections, but no one was looking at that. All eyes were either darting toward me or trying desperately not to. Denise didn't look at me at all. That was the real insult. She was speaking through me like I was drywall with a resume. "I know this is hard news," she said, batting her fake lashes like she cared. "But we need to be honest about what departments are actually driving value. Some legacy systems," well, she trailed off, then tilted her chin in my direction. "They just weren't built for scale." Legacy. She said it like it was a slur. I had built client retention from scratch with a $12K quarterly budget and a team of interns with psychology degrees and anxiety disorders. I was the reason Halston's churn rate dropped from 22% to 6.3% over 6 quarters. But to Denise, I was just another relic of the before times, before her lashes, before her job title, before her body was in the corner office and her hand was in Craig's. Someone cleared their throat, probably Jeff from accounts. Poor bastard always did that when tension hit the ozone layer. "Of course," Denise added, her voice syrupy with falsified empathy, "we'll revisit in Q1. But let's align expectations now so no one's building castles in the sky, okay? Castles in the sky." She was quoting a Pinterest board while severing our morale at the knees. I didn't say a word. I didn't ask about the performance metrics she skipped past, or the department review we were promised but never got. I didn't mention that 2 weeks ago, she sat across from me in the cafe and asked if I could mentor her on team culture like she wasn't already planning this little ambush. I just stared at her throat, that tight little hollow just beneath the jawline where lies like to gather. The silence must have unnerved her. She flinched, barely, but I saw it. Microsecond of insecurity cracking through her spray-tan smug. I folded my hands in my lap, didn't even bother taking notes. Across the room, Janet from payroll whispered to someone and I saw their eyes flick to me. Waiting, hoping I'd say something, start a war, but I wasn't here to scream. Screaming's for people who still think someone's listening. I let the rage settle low and cold in my stomach. The kind of rage that doesn't boil, it freezes. Becomes still. Becomes useful. Denise moved on to the next slide like she hadn't just detonated a grenade under a decade's worth of employee loyalty. And I smiled. Not a big one. Not enough to be read as defiance. Just enough to be unsettling. Just enough for Denise to notice it and not know why. Because I knew something she didn't. Something nestled deep in a binder she never opened, in a memo she never read, buried under the paperwork she skimmed and signed while polishing her executive tone and rehearsing her victim arc for when this all turned to ash. Schedule B, that's where the bodies were buried. And I had already started digging. The meeting ended with polite clapping, the kind you hear at a funeral when no one wants to admit the casket's still breathing. Denise floated out of the conference room like she'd just solved hunger, hips swaying under a blazer 2 sizes too tight for humility. People filed out in small clumps, murmuring polite nothings and empty jokes about how Q4 will be better, while quietly calculating how many shifts at Target it would take to make up for their slashed bonuses. I walked back to my office with the kind of calm that only shows up when you've decided something needs to die. Shut the door, drew the blinds, sat down in my chair, the one with the broken wheel I never bothered fixing. And I opened the folder, not a metaphorical one. A real, physical, red-tabbed folder labeled Lender Compliance Halston Systems/Meriton Bank. It lived in the bottom left drawer of my filing cabinet, just under the expired almond milk I kept forgetting to toss. I flipped through the contents with a muscle memory born of a decade spent cleaning up behind half-baked executives with Harvard MBAs and toddler attention spans. Lending covenants, risk protocols, Schedule A, Schedule B, there it was. Clause 7b.6, buried like a loaded trap inside 12-point Times New Roman legalese. I could have recited it by heart, but I read it anyway. Any modification, suspension, or cancellation of executive-level or managerial compensation, whether in part or whole, must be approved by a quorum of the board and disclosed to the lender, Meriton Bank, file ref. Hash 8892 LCA, within 72 hours. Failure to do so shall constitute a material breach of credit agreement terms and initiate review of active disbursement privileges. Translation, you don't just freeze bonuses without asking the lender's permission first. Not unless you want your line of credit yanked faster than Denise's synthetic lashes in a wind tunnel. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed. Felt the corners of my mouth curl, not in joy but recognition. She didn't know. Of course she didn't know. Because 3 months ago I had flagged this exact clause, highlighted it in yellow, wrote a memo titled Risk Exposure, Executive Compensation and Loan Agreement Compliance. It was 2 pages long, clear as glass, with bullet points, reference links, and action items in bold, and I sent it. Emailed it directly to Denise and Craig, the CEO himself. I opened Outlook and searched my sent folder. There it was, June 14th, timestamped at 10:42 a.m. I clicked it open. Read my own words, they still held. Still smart. Still surgical. Denise had replied with a thumbs up emoji and a thanks, we'll review. That was it. Craig, nothing. I scrolled down, no follow-up. No CC to legal. No forwarding chain. Nothing that even hinted they understood what they were holding. I checked our board's internal portal. No motions filed. No votes logged. The last recorded resolution related to executive compensation was from March, and it involved parking stipends. Christ. And I searched the lender's portal for notifications. Zero entries under bonus suspension or any Schedule B compliance tags. No alerts, no timestamps, no smoke. This wasn't just arrogance, it was negligence. And negligence in our world is one step removed from financial suicide. I sat there for a minute, watching the cursor blink like a metronome, counting down to detonation. Denise hadn't pulled a power move. She'd pulled a loaded pin. She'd done it with the grace of someone who thought reading a loan covenant meant scrolling past it on her iPad while sipping oat milk lattes in between vision board workshops. She hadn't read the memo, but the bank would. And here's the thing, the bank doesn't care who you're sleeping with. The bank cares about Schedule B. I pulled out my personal notebook, not the work-issued planner with the Halston logo. The leather one I kept for real problems, one that had outlasted 2 reorgs, 3 VPs, and 1 actual fire. I scribbled 3 lines, clause 7b.6 equals trigger, no board vote, no lender notice. Then I wrote one more word beneath that, underlined it twice. Weapon, because that's what it was now, not a clause, not a rule, not a technicality. A weapon, fully loaded. All it needed was a little pressure and a little silence. I didn't feel rage in that moment. Rage is noisy. What I felt was colder, more precise. A sense of inevitability. I had handed them the manual. They used it as a coaster. Now they could learn the hard way. Schedule B doesn't forgive, it just enforces. I didn't forward the memo out of anger. Anger implies they still held some part of me, my attention, my investment, my belief in reason. That ship had sunk 3 promotions ago. I forwarded it out of calculation, and mercy, because I could have gone nuclear. Instead, I chose surgical. The email went out at 7:03 p.m. After hours. No pomp, no fire. Just a quiet little digital envelope carrying all the rope they'd need to hang themselves, with my fingerprints nowhere near the knot. Subject line, per Schedule B recent developments body. Attached is the original compliance memo dated June 14th regarding executive compensation protocols and lender notification procedures. These advise per clause 7b.6. Attachment, PDF 2 pages, my memo, no edits, recipient, Clive Morton, Senior Compliance Auditor, Meriton Bank. Clive and I weren't friends. We were professionals who'd crossed paths during the last refinance in 2021. We shared a mutual distaste for sloppiness and a deep respect for paper trails. Clive didn't play politics, he played contracts. And contracts don't care about charisma, just compliance. I watched the email vanish into the ether, a torpedo cloaked in courtesy. No read receipt, no reply, perfect. Then I stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the parking lot below, rows of lease subs and midlife crises. The lights in the executive wing were still on. Denise's silhouette moved past Craig's office, probably updating her LinkedIn headline to Transformational Change Leader or some other branding exorcism. Let her. She had 72 hours to figure out what she'd done. 72 hours before the clause triggered internal review and froze our active line of credit like a dog's bowl in January. And me? I wouldn't be here when it hit. I opened my calendar. Booked the rest of the week as PTO. Reason, family obligations. Reality, I had points to burn and a beachfront airbnb waiting for someone with clean hands and a taste for controlled detonation. I filed the PTO request. Approved instantly. HR never denies my time, part fear, part habit. The company runs smoother when I'm gone, not because they don't need me, but because they finally realize how much they do. I shut down my computer, packed up my notebook, left the red folder exactly where it had always been, filed under C for consequences. Walking out of that building was like exiting a gas station with a lit match in your back pocket. Quiet, unbothered, but something behind you was about to blow. The air outside was thick with late September humidity, the kind that smells like mildew and incoming chaos. I lit a cigarette, my once-a-month ritual, and took a long drag. It tasted like dust, paper, and 1,000 ignored warnings. By the time Denise opened her inbox the next morning, I'd be in a different zip code. Maybe sipping iced coffee with my feet in the ocean. Maybe watching her name explode across Slack threads like a virus nobody wanted to touch. I wouldn't know, wouldn't care. I had zero interest in watching the fire. I'd already laid the gasoline and tossed the match. My work was done. Back at my apartment, I tossed my laptop bag on the couch and started packing. Swimsuit, charger, the leather notebook, just in case. I scrolled through Airbnb confirmations. Everything was in place. Coastal, private, adult only. No boardrooms, no KPI, no pastel PowerPoints about strategic vision. Denise had made a fatal mistake. She thought silence meant surrender. But silence is its own language, and I'd written every syllable of this chapter with ice. By the time the first whispers reached her about loan terms and Schedule B, I'd be 2 mimosas deep, watching the tide roll in. Let her run in circles. Let the CEO fumble through outdated org charts. Let legal pretend they hadn't been warned. I'd done my part, quietly, precisely, and I was just getting started. It started with a sticky note. Yellow, curling at the edges, stuck to Denise's office door at 8:14 a.m. in the kind of neat, HR script handwriting that tries too hard to look casual. Quick check and bonus freeze authorization stop by when you can. Janine, she found it as she breezed in, late as usual. Iced oat milk latte in hand, wearing a linen blazer that looked expensive until you noticed the price tag still dangling from the armpit seam. She peeled the note off with a laugh like she was above it, above questions, above scrutiny, above having to explain anything to Janine from HR. But by 10 a.m., Denise had already stopped laughing. Janine didn't come alone. She brought the head of payroll with her, and a compliance liaison. No titles exchanged, no chit-chat. They were already seated in Denise's office when she returned from her creative visualization session, which is what she called her morning smoke breaks on the loading dock. They asked to see the signed board minutes authorizing the performance bonus freeze. She blinked once, then twice, before giving them the O. I mean, Craig approved it verbally line she'd used to bulldoze every inconvenient process since the moment she started dry humping her way into the org chart. No, we're just double-checking, Janine smiled. It's standard with anything that might touch Schedule B. That name, Schedule B, hit her like someone whispered a secret in a language she didn't speak but somehow still felt shiver down her spine. She gave them a vague smile and promised to loop Craig in. He nodded, all polite and silent, and filed out like undertakers making measurements. Denise tried calling Craig, straight to voicemail. The man was either on a plane or in a sauna somewhere pretending not to know who she was. The CFO, gone silent too, out of office message reading unreachable until Monday with zero context. Odd for a Thursday. Alarming, even. By noon, the whispers had already started. Slack lit up like a brush fire. Someone in ops said they saw the Meriton Bank logo on the building sign-in sheet. Someone in finance said compliance pulled Q3 resolution files out of archive and were red flagging documents with no timestamps. Someone else swore they heard Clive Morton's name in the break room. Clive Morton, Meriton's senior compliance guy. Denise finally typed Schedule B into the internal wiki search. One result. A memo. June 14th. Authored by Angela Martin. Subject line, risk exposure, executive compensation and loan agreement compliance. Denise's throat dried. She clicked it. 2 pages, crisp, bullet-pointed, every line a blade. The final note, any unilateral action without lender notification may constitute a breach triggering loan reassessment. Her own reply sat there in plain text, thumbs up thanks, will review. She slammed her laptop shut so hard the screen flickered. Across the hall, Janine from HR peeked in again, this time without knocking. Hey again, sorry to bug, but legal's asking for confirmation on whether Craig's approval was documented or informal. Do you happen to have, I'll get back to you, Denise snapped, smiling through her teeth. Just, still collecting everything. Of course, Janine said, backing out slowly. Just want to make sure we're covered in case the lender follows up. She didn't say because the lender already followed up. She didn't have to. Denise felt the shape of it now, an invisible hand tightening around her job title. The freeze wasn't the mistake. The mistake was assuming no one would check the locks before she kicked the door down. And still, she thought maybe it could be salvaged. She thought, if Craig gets back to me, if I can show intent, if I spin it as a miscommunication, because people like Denise don't believe they can lose. Not really. They believe if they smile hard enough and wear the right heels, the world will move the goalposts before the axe falls. What she didn't know was the axe had already been swung. She just hadn't heard it land. Angela's name wasn't in the room. She wasn't on the emails. She wasn't CC'd on the audit chain. But her fingerprints were everywhere, on the memo, on the silence, on the calm that always comes before the sirens. By the end of the day, Denise had asked the receptionist 3 times if any external visitors had signed in, each time trying to act like she was just making conversation. Reception finally said, yeah, some guy from a bank. Brought a huge binder, asked for access to the boardroom. Denise smiled, said, oh cool, like it was all part of the plan. Then she walked into the executive restroom, locked the stall, and sat there in silence for 20 minutes, clutching her phone like it was a life raft. Clive Morton was in the building, and she had no idea what page he was on. Friday morning, 9:26 a.m. The security badge scanner let out its usual indifferent beep as the elevator doors opened onto the executive floor. But this time, it wasn't the overpriced breakfast delivery guy or another sales exec trying to score points by showing up early with a PowerPoint no one asked for. It was Clive. Clive Morton, senior compliance auditor. Meriton Bank, not that he announced himself. He didn't need to. He wore a charcoal suit that looked like it had been pressed with intention, carried a binder so thick it could have qualified as a blunt weapon, and had the kind of walk that made receptionists forget their own names. "Good morning," he said to the front desk. "I'm here to review documentation pertaining to Schedule B compliance." No smile, no flair, just a man on assignment. A man with authority written into the bloodline of your funding. Let me call someone," the receptionist stammered, already fumbling with the phone, eyes darting toward the hallway that led to Denise's office like it might swallow her whole. Clive didn't wait. He placed his binder on the edge of the desk, opened it like a priest preparing for exorcism, and slid a page forward. "Here's my access letter, signed by Meriton's legal counsel. I'll need a private room, internet access, and the following: Q3 board resolutions, Schedule B amendments, and all documentation related to executive compensation freezes within the past fiscal quarter." The girl blinked, nodded, pressed 3 buttons without looking. "Hi, Janine, he's here." By 9:35, Denise's door flew open. She strode out in a white blouse too crisp for comfort and heels that echoed like gunshots across polished tile. "Mr. Morton," she said, voice like a performance in a room that wasn't clapping. "We weren't expecting you today." "No, you weren't," he replied, already packing up the letter, "which is why I'm here." She froze for half a second, that's all it took. A micro pause, just long enough for her smile to tighten, for the hallway to suddenly feel 10 degrees warmer. "Of course," she said, turning toward the small conference room near the executive kitchenette. "We'll get you all set up in here. Janine can coordinate the files." Clive didn't even blink. "I'd prefer to receive the documentation directly from the source." "No assistance, I'll wait." She swallowed, but it sounded like a cannon shot inside her skull. "Sure, let me just loop in Craig real quick. Your CEO is currently listed as in transit per your assistant," he interrupted, calmly opening his binder again. "And the last Schedule B compliance update we received was dated April 3rd. Are no entries past that. So unless there's been an oversight," "No oversight," she cut in too quickly. "I'm sure it's just not filed yet, I'll track it down." Clive gave her a look that felt like a mirror, not because it reflected her, because it sized her. Then he sat, opened his laptop, and waited. By 9:52 a.m., Denise had called legal, left a message, texted Craig, no reply, emailed the CFO out of office. She leaned against the break room counter, eyes locked on the hallway to the conference room where Clive was now reviewing something and making the occasional note in red pen, like a high school English teacher grading your bankruptcy. Janine from HR approached her cautiously, like someone approaching a wounded raccoon with a rabies dart. "He's asking for the bonus freeze documentation, including who signed off. Do we have that?" Denise looked like she'd been slapped with a manila folder. "Tell him it's being retrieved from archives," she said through clenched teeth. "But is it? Just say it." Janine nodded and retreated, the scapegoat in training. By 10:12, whispers had spread again. Sales was already speculating. Ops had noticed their Friday reports weren't uploading. IT said someone from the external compliance team had asked for temporary server access logs from Q3. Denise paced her office like a zoo animal who had finally noticed the glass walls. She tried calling Craig again. Voicemail. She sent a Slack ping to legal. "Need to confirm, did we technically notify the lender about the Q3 freeze? Just making sure we're aligned." No reply. Outside, Clive continued his silent audit, occasionally looking up and scanning the hallway like a man listening for something he already knew was coming. Janine finally handed him a small stack of papers, mostly HR memos, one unsigned draft. He didn't react. He just turned the page, made another note in red, and said, "I'll need full board minutes from the Q3 wrap meeting." Signed. "And if the vote on compensation freeze didn't happen during a formal session, I'll require documentation confirming executive authorization with timestamps." Denise stood in the doorway, hands visibly trembling, lips frozen in a half-smile like a ventriloquist's dummy waiting for her puppeteer to return. "Right away," she croaked. Just right away. The room had become a pressure chamber. The longer Clive stayed, the more reality compressed around her. And somewhere, far away from the boardroom and the sweat-soaked panic behind her collar, Angela Martin was probably sipping something tropical and ice-cold, unaware or perfectly aware. A man with a binder was raising Denise's Empire one red pen stroke at a time. The next morning's board meeting began exactly as you'd expect a corporate funeral to start, everyone pretending nothing was dead yet. They shuffled into the room one by one, directors with tight smiles and looser collars, the COO already sweating through his starch, legal tapping her pen like Morse code for "I warned you idiots," and Denise in her usual seat, posture rigid, hairline screaming under the strain of a fourth round of dry shampoo. Clive was already there when they arrived, sitting at the far end of the table like the world's most bored executioner, binder closed, laptop beside him, unreadable. He hadn't spoken since he walked in, just nodded, sat, waited. The room was unusually quiet. Even the usual pre-meeting rituals, checking phones, passing breath mints, whispering about golf scores, felt forced, strained, like everyone knew they were about to walk into a storm they couldn't outrun. At 9:03 a.m., the board chair tapped his tablet, cleared his throat, and said, "Let's get started." But the words came out brittle. No one reached for coffee. No one joked about Denise's leaner bonus model. No one looked at her, in fact, not directly. Then Clive opened the binder. The sound of it was surgical, final, like a door slamming shut 3 rooms away. He flipped several pages, each motion precise, quiet, the way a priest flips through last rites. He stopped at a tab marked in red, Schedule B. He didn't lift his head. He just read aloud. Any executive compensation freeze must be disclosed to the lender within 72 hours. Noncompliance triggers immediate review of credit terms. He looked up. Dead silence. Then, with all the warmth of a winter funeral, Clive turned his eyes toward Denise. Was the lender notified? Her mouth opened, but nothing came out at first. Then a breath, sharp, shallow. We had internal discussions. Craig was going to, I flagged it. Clive didn't blink. That's not what I asked. She laughed. A soft, high-pitched thing that died before it hit the walls. We were going to file it retroactively, I believe. There was a delay. Craig had the memo. The board chair turned slowly in his seat. Which memo? He asked. Denise blinked. The one. Angela's? She sent it to me and Craig. I think back in June, maybe July. You think? It was on my radar. I just assumed. The room cracked open like a fault line. You assumed? Legal finally spoke, voice sharp, slicing through the stale air. You assumed a Schedule B clause would handle itself. Denise shifted in her seat. It wasn't a formal freeze. It was more of a strategic pause. A cash flow safeguard, Jesus Christ, muttered the CFO, who had just returned from sick leave. The board chair's face went pale. Not angry, cold, like he had just realized the brakes were gone and the cliff was approaching. Did you or did you not file Schedule B compliance paperwork with Meriton Bank within 72 hours of announcing the freeze? He asked, his voice low and deliberate. Denise looked at Clive, looked at the binder, looked at her nails, chipped at the edges now. I don't have that answer at this moment. Clive closed the binder with the same careful gravity he'd opened it with. Then he reached into his bag, pulled out a second document, and slid it across the table. This is a formal lender notification log. The last recorded Schedule B update was April 3rd. Nothing has been submitted since. Based on the company's own public communication, that being the Q3 wrap meeting recording, you announced a full freeze on executive performance bonuses on record. He tapped the table once, twice. Therefore, Halston Systems is now under active credit review, effective immediately. The sound that followed wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was worse. It was silent, because when your lender says credit review, they don't mean a friendly chat, they mean frozen accounts, stalled disbursements, audits with gloves off. The board chair sat back, hands steepled like he was trying not to vomit. We may need to call a recess, he said, voice thinner than before. Clive nodded. I'll be here. Denise didn't move, her spine had locked, her face gone slack, and all across the table eyes were slowly shifting, not toward the problem, but toward the source. Angela Martin wasn't in the room, but her memo was. Her voice in absentia had just shattered the air. And this wasn't even the end, it was the start of something worse. Clive stood without a word. Binder closed, laptop tucked under one arm, phone already in hand. He didn't excuse himself, just turned and walked out of the boardroom like gravity no longer applied to him. The glass door clicked shut behind him with a quiet finality that hit harder than any slammed fist ever could. The silence he left behind was suffocating. The board chair stared at the wood grain in the table like it might open up and swallow him whole. Legal was flipping back through her notes, pen trembling just slightly in her hand. The CFO sat frozen, halfway through standing up like he couldn't decide whether to flee or faint. And Denise? Denise looked like someone had just yanked her roots out. All of them. Her mouth hung open, lips slightly parted, no words forming, just the hollow wheeze of someone realizing their parachute was made of paper. She turned slowly, trying to catch someone's eye, someone who might offer her a rope, a lifeline, anything. No one did. Weren't looking at her anymore. They were waiting for the call because everyone knew what came next. 4 minutes passed, quiet, brutal, the kind of quiet where you could hear wristwatches ticking and the faint hum of the air conditioning like a countdown to impact. Then, a buzz, the CFO's phone lit up. He stared at it, didn't answer, it buzzed again. Finally, he picked up. Yeah, he listened, and kept listening. His eyes slowly widened, the color draining from his face in real time. He put the call on speaker. This is Sarah Benning from Meriton Bank, Compliance Oversight Division, came the voice, steady, firm, immune to charm. This is to confirm that, as of 9:46 a.m., all disbursements underlying have been formally placed on hold pending credit review. No further access will be granted until a full audit is completed and approved by our internal risk committee. The CFO tried to respond, but only managed, wait. All of line A? Yes, sir. That includes vendor payments, operations float, and employee expense reimbursements associated with executive tiers. Standard clause enforcement under Schedule B noncompliance. A pause, then, is there anything else? No one in the room moved, no one breathed. The CFO swallowed. No, thank you, the line went dead. Someone no one saw who let out a low whistle, not sarcastic, not amused, just stunned. Like watching a skyscraper sway before it falls. Denise's voice cracked. I didn't authorize a freeze on everything, just performance bonuses. This is a misunderstanding. We can explain, you can explain, legal shot back to the lender and the audit team, and potentially the press if this hits the wires. It wasn't malicious. Denise barked, her voice climbing into that brittle octave where apologies try to live. Craig was supposed to submit the notification. He said he would, he was handling it. Craig, the board chair said slowly, is currently in Milan, according to his assistant, and unreachable until Monday. Denise blinked. I didn't know that, exactly. Her breath came faster now, panic fully visible. The confident smirk from 2 days ago had been replaced by something raw, hollow. She looked down at her phone like it might save her. No new messages, no backup arriving. Across town, a sunbeam slid across the surface of a whitewashed patio. Gulls cried above a calm coastline, and Angela Martin sat in a canvas lounge chair, iced coffee in hand, the tide gently crawling toward her bare feet. Her phone buzzed once. Janine HR, did you see this mess? Angela took one sip of coffee, set the cup down gently beside her, and stared out at the water for a moment. Then she picked up the phone, typed 2 words, not yet, sent. Then she smiled, just a little, because Denise had always talked too loud. And now the silence was doing all the talking for her. And every syllable spelled collapse. The emergency board meeting was called for 6 o'clock p.m., which in corporate speak means someone's head was on the menu, and no one was leaving until it was served. They held it in the smaller boardroom, not the showy one with panoramic views and espresso service. No, this was the kind of space where bad news lived. No windows, gray walls, a table that sounded hollow when you tapped it. Someone had clearly rushed through setting it up. The projector wasn't working, and legal had to pull in a rolling whiteboard from an abandoned training room to draw timelines. Denise showed up early. She wore a navy pantsuit that might have looked powerful if she hadn't paired it with eyes that hadn't blinked in hours and foundation trying to hold back a stress rash along her jawline. She walked in like she belonged there. She didn't. The meeting kicked off without greetings. The board chair opened with a flat, let's move quickly. His tone had all the warmth of a foreclosure notice. Clive wasn't there, his job was done. But the tremor he'd triggered was still reverberating through every syllable spoken. The CFO gave a grim update. Meriton Bank had officially suspended all future draws from Line A. Not frozen, suspended, which meant until the audit was complete and accepted. Halston Systems had no access to its primary source of operational cash. The phrase payroll impact likely was spoken aloud. No one pretended to misunderstand. Denise tried to jump in. Look, I've said this was an internal miscommunication. If Craig had just, but she didn't get far, the board chair cut her off. Denise will need you to step outside for the next portion. She froze. You're asking me to leave, it's procedure, legal added. Nothing personal. Denise stood slowly, spine stiff. She walked out, her heels making sharp, defiant clicks, like she still believed this could be fixed with spin and a little throat clearing. The door closed behind her. Legal flipped open her folder and pulled out a printed email thread. This, she said, sliding the document down the table, is the memo in question. The board chair skimmed the top. Subject, risk exposure, executive compensation and loan agreement compliance. Author, Angela Martin. Date, June 14th. Recipients, Denise Harper, Craig Langston, there it was in black and white. Angela had flagged it 3 months ago. Legal flipped to the next page. Here's Denise's response. Thumbs up emoji, no follow-up, no board notification, no submission to Meriton. She didn't need to explain the implications. The silence in the room did it for her. Then came the next knife. This isn't the only memo Angela sent. Legal continued. There are 6 others over the last year, all raising variations of the same concern: Schedule B procedural neglect, lack of documentation, and vague authorization chains. All sent to Craig, all ignored. The CEO, Craig Langston, phoned in from whatever 5-star European hotel was currently charging his corporate card $42 for sparkling water, finally spoke up. That's not entirely accurate, he said, his voice warbling through the speakerphone like a guilty conscience trying to sound confident. There was ongoing dialogue. These things fall through the cracks sometimes. They fall through the cracks when one memo gets missed, the board chair cut in. This is a pattern. No one defended Craig, not even the CFO who had once owed him a golf trip and a job. Another board member leaned forward, voice low. How much exposure are we talking? Legal's lips tightened. If payroll misses. Lawsuits, class actions, employee exits. Not to mention the signal it sends to our remaining investors. The room deflated, like something vital had leaked out and wouldn't be coming back. Back in the hallway, Denise stared at her phone screen, opening and closing apps like they might offer a map out of the quicksand. Messages from Craig, unread. No one was replying. No one was coming. Inside, someone whispered, how the hell did we let this happen? And someone else answered, because we were too busy listening to the people who spoke the loudest. Meanwhile, somewhere hundreds of miles away, Angela Martin reclined in a beach chair facing the horizon. A tall cocktail, something orange and ridiculous, rested beside her. Her sunglasses reflected nothing but open sky and calm tide. Her phone buzzed. The team group chat was lighting up. Mark from client retention. They just sent Denise out of the room. We're guessing it's a full autopsy. Cynthia, they're mentioning your memo again. Legal has it in print. Tamara, wait, girl, are you in a bikini right now? Angela grinned and sent a photo, bare feet in the sand, cocktail in hand, her smile as untouched as the beach around her. No caption, didn't need one. The message was clear, I'm good. And Denise? She was still outside the boardroom, sitting in a chair that suddenly felt very far from the table where power was being redistributed, where the wreckage of her ambition was being catalogued, where the people who mattered were finally realizing who had kept this company from burning to the ground and who had quietly stepped back just in time to watch it fall. The next morning, Denise was gone. No fanfare, no teary all-hands Zoom where someone faked emotion and HR handed out grief pamphlets like candy. No balloons, no best of luck on your next chapter LinkedIn post with a professionally lit headshot. Just a silent escort from the building before the first pot of office coffee had even finished brewing. Security badge deactivated. Parking pass revoked. Calendar wiped clean. By the time most employees filtered in, she was already a ghost. Her office cleaned out, her name stripped from the org chart like it had never existed. The framed quote she kept on her desk, "Move fast and own the room," was face down in the trash outside facilities. Only the silence remained. Angela returned the following Monday. She arrived at 9:01 a.m., exactly 1 minute after the new week began, because there was no reason to rush when the world was already on her clock. The front desk greeted her like royalty returning from exile. "Welcome back," the receptionist whispered almost reverently. Angela gave a nod, didn't break stride. Her old badge still worked. That wasn't an accident. She took the elevator up to the third floor, her inbox already flooded with invites and calendar reshuffles. But what mattered wasn't digital, it was structural. Because when she stepped into her department's wing, everything had changed. Her old office now had a nameplate that read Board Liaison Strategic Risk. New reporting lines, direct access, fewer middlemen, and legal's extension was speed dialed into her desk phone. Denise's pet projects canceled, her reorganizations reversed, her executive culture realignment task force disbanded before it could send another email. Angela walked through the halls with quiet purpose. No grand return speech. No vindictive smirks. Just presence, the kind that couldn't be taught or faked. The kind that doesn't need to prove anything anymore. Her team looked up when she passed. Some nodded, some smiled, but all of them knew. Later that afternoon, she was summoned to a closed-door meeting with the board chair. No agenda, just an acknowledgement. He sat across from her, no pretense of superiority. His tie loosened. Eyes tired in that way people get when they've finally seen what's been in front of them all along. "I want to thank you," he said quietly. "Not just for the memo, but for how you handled it." Angela said nothing. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table. "You could have made this ugly, loud, gone to the press, walked out and lit a match behind you." She held his gaze, still silent. He nodded almost to himself. "Thank you for not raising your voice, that was all." Didn't say more, didn't need to. She stood, extended a hand. He took it without hesitation. The balance of power had shifted and both of them knew it. Back in her office, Angela closed the door. The light through the blinds cast soft lines across her desk like prison bars turned transparent. She opened her bottom drawer. Inside was the red folder. Same tab, lender compliance, Halston systems / merit and bank, same content, same danger. She pulled out the memo, smoothed the page, still crisp, still lethal. Then she took a sticky note from her drawer, scribbled 3 words, and placed it gently on top before sliding everything back into place. Use again if necessary. She closed the drawer, locked it, pocketed the key. Silence had done its job, no fireworks, no courtroom drama. Just strategic patience, a paper trail, and the unshakable certainty that she had warned them once, and once was enough. She turned toward the window. Somewhere below, life churned on. Deliveries, deadlines, people unaware they were walking across the ashes of someone else's hubris. Angela didn't smile. She didn't need to, because this wasn't about revenge. It was about precision, and she had become a blade. You're the real MVPs of the office jungle. Thanks for watching. Smash that subscribe button, or the coffee pot might just forget your next brew.